Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into some environmental issues, but with a bit of a twist. We're going to be looking at these issues through the lens of an English language learning resource.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it gives us a really interesting perspective on how these topics are presented and discussed. We'll be talking about air quality, waste management, and sustainable farming practices.
That's good.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty fascinating. So let's just jump right in. The first dialogue in this resource focuses on air quality. And it starts with somebody visiting a city and being really surprised by how clean the air is.
Oh.
Because, their dad had told them all these horror stories about how bad the air quality used to be. But clearly, things have changed.
Right.
So I'm curious, what led to such a dramatic improvement?
Well, the dialogue really highlights the impact of public awareness. It seems like once people really started caring about the issue, it, kind of put pressure on the government to take action. And they implemented some pretty strict regulations, like driving restrictions in the city center. Okay.
Bans on certain types of fuel for heating.
Wow.
And even relocating heavy industries away from populated areas. So, they really took a comprehensive approach.
That's so interesting. I hadn't considered that angle before. You know how just people caring about something can really have that effect on the government?
Yeah, it's definitely a powerful force.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it clearly made a difference. They even talk about stricter car emission regulations leading to cleaner cars on the road, which, makes you wonder if that's something that all cities should be adopting. What do you think?
It's a great example of how relatively swift environmental improvement can happen, within a decade when there's a collective push for change.
Right.
However, the source also mentions that this city, even though they've made great strides, they're not completely out of the woods yet.
Really?
Yeah, they still struggle with winter haze.
Huh.
Which, makes me think about the limitations of even the most, well-intentioned policies. That's a good point. But, it is encouraging to see that progress is being made, but it does sound like there's still a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
They did mention ongoing investments in public transportation as a potential solution to combat that haze.
Yeah, public transportation is definitely a key factor in improving air quality. Not only does it reduce the number of cars on the road,
Right?
but it also encourages a shift towards more sustainable modes of transport.
Absolutely. So I guess the question for our listener is, what's the air quality like in your city?
Yeah. Have you noticed any changes over the years?
And what measures are being taken to combat pollution where you live?
Even more importantly, are there things you think could be done better or differently in your city to further improve the air you breathe?
Yeah. I think it's always good to reflect on our own surroundings and see where we can contribute to positive change. Okay, let's move on from the air we breathe to the stuff we throw away. This next section focuses on waste management and recycling, and it starts with this sort of humorous exchange about someone being totally baffled by a really detailed waste sorting system.
Oh, that's so relatable.
Right.
For many of us, recycling has become second nature,
Mm.
but the dialogue reminds us that these systems can vary greatly from place to place.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that what seems obvious to us might be completely new to someone else.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to forget that. So this particular system has a blue bin for plastics, a brown bin for paper and cardboard,
Okay.
a green bin for bio-waste like food scraps,
Got it.
and a black bucket specifically for glass and tins. It's pretty detailed.
It is. It makes you wonder if this level of detail is the norm, or is this a particularly complex system?
Right.
And it highlights a crucial goal, reducing the amount of waste going to landfill.
Oh, that's a good point.
They describe landfill as a place where unsorted garbage is just buried, which, if you think about it, is a pretty grim end for all the stuff we throw away.
Yeah, I never really thought about it like that before.
They also briefly mention dump, which is basically an unstructured landfill where waste isn't buried, which often leads to environmental hazards.
It's amazing how much we just don't think about just in our daily lives. It really highlights the importance of proper waste management. So I'm curious, how does your city handle waste? Do you have a similar multi-bin system, or is it more simplified?
And what about recycling? What types of waste are commonly recycled in your country? It's fascinating how these practices can differ so much around the world.
It really makes you think about the entire journey of our waste, from our bins to, where does it all go?
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, what role do we play in ensuring responsible waste management?
Yeah, it is. It really is something to think about. And speaking of journeys, let's shift gears a bit to a topic that's been on a rather, alarming journey of its own, sustainable farming. This section of the resource really piqued my interest because they actually reference this book called The One Straw Revolution, which, really delves into this whole idea of how we can make farming more environmentally friendly.
Oh, wow. The One Straw Revolution. That sounds like a fascinating read. I might have to check that out. But I'm curious, what kind of challenges does modern farming face when it comes to sustainability?
Well, the dialogue kind of points out how reliant modern farming has become on machinery, automation, and, in many cases, chemical products like pesticides and herbicides.
Right.
And while these chemicals, they're intended to boost yields and protect crops, they can also have, unintended consequences for the ecosystem.
So it's kind of like a trade-off, right? Like
Yeah.
efficiency and higher yields on one hand, but potential environmental harm on the other?
Exactly. It raises some, really important questions about how we can feed a growing global population while minimizing our impact on the environment. And this is where the concept of organic farming comes in.
Right. And the source specifically mentions that organic farming can yield the same amount of food as conventional methods, but without relying on those artificial chemicals.
hmm
So it makes you wonder, like, why isn't organic farming more widespread if it can be just as productive?
That's a great question. And it's a complex one. I mean, there are a lot of factors at play, including cost, consumer demand, and even just like ingrained practices within the agricultural industry. It's definitely a conversation worth having as we think about, the future of food production.
For sure. And it's not just about the crops themselves. The dialogue also touches upon livestock farming and, rather pointedly, the often unseen reality of slaughterhouses.
That's a crucial point and one that often gets overlooked. I mean, it brings up the ethical considerations of how we raise and process animals for food, right?
Yeah.
It challenges us to think about where our food comes from and the impact it has not just on the environment, but on animal welfare as well.
It's definitely food for thought, both literally and figuratively.
Hmm.
So, thinking about the farms in your country, what comes to mind? Are they largely mechanized operations, or are there still smaller, maybe more traditional farms around?
And when you're at the grocery store, does the idea of buying organic food factor into your choices? What influences your decisions when it comes to the food you buy?
Yeah, those are great questions for our listener to ponder. I think it's really important to understand the practices behind our food production because ultimately, we're all a part of this complex system.
Okay, let's shift gears again to a topic that has been making waves, for decades now, global warming.
This section of the dialogue starts with a very, real and relatable concern, rising sea levels and the potential devastation it could bring to coastal regions. It even mentions, personal observations like hotter summers and increased instances of flooding, which really brings the issue home. It's a stark reminder that climate change isn't some, abstract, far-off threat. It's already impacting lives around the world in very tangible ways. The dialogue also makes this interesting point about the interchangeable use of global warming and climate change, which is something we hear all the time.
Yeah, it's a subtle point, but I think it speaks to how language can actually shape our understanding of these issues. Sometimes, global warming can feel more immediate and alarming, while climate change can encompass a broader range of effects.
And speaking of alarming, the dialogue doesn't shy away from the harsh reality that even if we stopped all emissions today, global warming would persist for at least 50 years because of the greenhouse gases already trapped in the atmosphere.
It's a sobering thought that highlights the, long-lasting effects of these gases, primarily carbon dioxide or CO2, and it just emphasizes the urgency of addressing this issue because even with, drastic measures, we're already locked into a certain amount of warming.
It really is a race against time, isn't it? So what can we do? The dialogue focuses on two potential solutions, carbon taxes and reforestation programs. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, they're two very different approaches, each with their own, set of complexities. A carbon tax is designed to, essentially make companies pay for their CO2 emissions, which creates an economic incentive to reduce pollution. So it's a very market-based approach that aims to shift behavior through, financial consequences. Reforestation programs, on the other hand, they focus on absorbing existing CO2 from the atmosphere by planting more trees. So it's a more nature-based solution that aims to kind of restore balance to the ecosystem.
What do you think about them?
It sounds like both solutions have their pros and cons. Do you think they have the potential to make a real impact?
That's a great question. It really depends on a lot of factors, like how these solutions are implemented and the level of, global cooperation involved, there are definitely challenges to overcome. But it is encouraging to see that potential solutions are being explored, right? Absolutely. Speaking of exploration, let's go back to our listener. How concerned are you about global warming and its potential impact?
Yeah. What effects, if any, are you already seeing in your country? And what worries you the most about the future?
And finally, what are your thoughts on the solutions being proposed? Do you think they're enough to tackle this global challenge? Or do we need to be thinking even bigger and bolder? Those are definitely some heavy questions to think about, but it is so important to grapple with them.
Absolutely.
It's easy to feel, I think, overwhelmed by the scale of these challenges.
Yeah.
But I think it's empowering to remember that we can all play a part in shaping a more sustainable future.
I completely agree. It's easy to get caught up in, the doom and gloom, but there's also a lot of hope and innovation out there.
Right.
It's about staying informed, engaging in these conversations, and finding ways to make a difference, both, individually and collectively.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's exactly what we've been trying to do in this deep dive. We've explored this whole range of environmental issues, air quality, waste management, sustainable farming, and the, ever-present challenge of climate change. And we've looked at it all through this really interesting lens of an English language learning resource.
It's been fascinating to see how these topics are presented in a way that's both, informative and engaging for language learners. It really highlights the power of language to not only convey information, but also inspire action.
For sure. And, we've seen how individual choices like, opting for public transportation or being mindful of our waste can really contribute to a larger movement towards sustainability.
Absolutely.
And we've explored, the complexities of modern farming and the urgent need to address global warming before it's too late.
It's been a thought-provoking journey.
It really has.
And hopefully one that has sparked some, new ideas and perspectives for our listener.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. What do you consider to be the biggest environmental issue in your country? And what steps can be taken to address it?
This deep dive has given us a starting point, but the conversation doesn't end here.
Right.
We encourage you to continue exploring these issues, learning more about the challenges and solutions, and finding ways to, contribute to a more sustainable future for us all.
So well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring these important topics with us, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.